I'm Allister Heath and I'm responding to some of the excellent reader comments on my latest article. So we begin with a comment from Ian Duffin. If genuine Conservative policies are the solution, then the real culprits are Cameron, May, Johnson and Sunak, who have collectively squandered the right-leaning voters' loyalty and trust. We, that is traditional Conservatives, will not recover for a generation. Well, yes, the fact that Britain now has a majority of the population who are net beneficiaries of government spending, who receive more in benefits and services than they pay in tax, well, all of that happened during the Conservatives' time in power. They also didn't push through the supply side reforms, the tax cuts, the deregulation, the reduced government expenditure, the privatisation and so on that this country needed. But I think it's a continuum. The Blair-Brown duopoly turned out to be a disaster for Britain, culminating in the financial crisis. The Tories came in, they reduced the budget deficit, which was good, but they continued otherwise the drift towards social democracy. So yes, it's a disaster, and I blame the Labour, Liberal, Tory triopoly, effectively, of the past 30 years. The next question comes from Vivian Cousins. What's the point in growing a public sector, promoting benefits, increasing immigration, when you won't have any money left? You're voted in for another term, then what? Both the current government and the past governments just simply did not have a guiding ideology that put all of this in context. Instead, they just looked at the day-to-day. They looked at the benefit system as a way to equalise wealth, equalise income. They were obsessed with redistribution, with deciles, and I think that kind of approach simply doesn't work. You have to have a worldview which basically wants a smaller state where bigger families, bigger individuals, a stronger civil society, more independent people that don't depend on government assistance. And whenever a politician wants to change this, and yes, in a very small way, Rachel Reeves started off wanting to change this by cutting some benefits, where there's a massive backlash because nobody's been discussing these kinds of ideas. Heath remains incandescent that his utopia is even further from reach. Boomers are a hefty part of those in receipt of more benefits than they pay in tax. They're mostly retired, expecting the triple lock to continue and decent healthcare in their dotage. Well, yes, I am indeed incandescent, and my utopia is not being reached, I'm afraid to say, and is not even that popular. Only about 15 or 16% of the public want to cut tax and spend. But that is not really a reason to just to pick on some demographics and blame them. This is a social problem. Yes, the triple lock pension is not sustainable, but what you really need to do is massively increase the private provision of pensions, and to make sure that in the generations, in the decades, in the years to come, when people retire, they have a lot more money and a lot less dependent on government assistance. The next question comes from DC. What happens when we as a country can't pay our national debt? I can't imagine the scenario. Well, I think there's two answers here. We will always be able to pay our national debt off because we still control our own central bank. The problem with that is if you start printing pounds to pay off your debts, well, you get a lot of inflation. You destroy the value of your currency, it collapses internally in terms of its purchasing power, and it collapses externally in terms of its exchange rate. There's a second part to this answer, which is while we may always be able to pay back our debt in pounds, it will become harder and harder to borrow as the markets realise that we are running out of cash. So interest rates will shoot up on UK gilts, and at some point you may even need to start borrowing in foreign currency, which would obviously be a disaster because it's much harder to pay back a foreign currency, and that's where you can get a real default. So yes, the outlook is grim. So far, while interest rates are very high and we're wasting more and more money paying back interest, they're not yet at terrible levels, but we can see the direction of travel, and it's a very grim one. The final question is from N. Sage. Having a big state involved in people's lives can be a good thing. Look at some Scandinavian countries where people believe in their governments and trust them. These are countries where libertarianism thrives. Well, okay, there was a couple of decades maybe where the model that you describe held true to a certain degree in Scandinavia. All of that's gone down the drain. Places like Sweden have seen an epidemic of social dislocation, massive amount of terrorism, bomb attacks, all that kind of stuff. So They've cracked down massively on things like immigration. They've shifted dramatically to the right. Even left-wing parties have shifted dramatically to the right. There's been reductions in public spending and so on. Sweden was pretty libertarian during lockdowns, right? During COVID. They did not lock down. They were one of the freest countries in the world when it came to lockdowns. So I don't really buy that aspect of Scandinavian philosophy either. I think it's actually quite different to the way it's being represented. But I will just answer with one more point, which is take Denmark. They now have a negative net immigration to their country, and they're even paying some people to leave. So I support a very different view, which is free markets, a small government, small c conservatism, liberty, and I think that is the best solution for Britain, but sadly that's not the solution that Keir Starmer is advocating. As always, thank you to all our subscribers for your comments. Keep them coming, and we will try and get back to as many of you as possible.